They never even asked me. It was a Sunday afternoon, and I remember the way the air felt, humid, tense, heavy with unspoken truths. Dad stood at the head of the long oak table and smiled proudly at my brother, handing him the family business, papers like it was a graduation gift. He didn't look at me. No one did. Not Mom, not Uncle Ray. It was as if I'd melted into the wallpaper. I wanted to scream. I had worked summers there. I knew more about that company's systems than my brother ever would. But to them, I was just the daughter, smart, polite, and invisible. He took it, of course. Grinned wide, shook hands, and posed for a photo that would later be framed in Dad's office. It wasn't even subtle. The favoritism, the betrayal wrapped in a ribbon of tradition. My father always said, "Boys carry legacy, girls find new ones." So I left the room with a smile so tight it cracked when I reached the hallway. They didn't see my tears. They never looked back. I went to college with a fire in my chest and silence in my throat. I learned numbers, strategy, the pulse of markets, and the psychology of failure. Each exam I passed felt like a step away from that cursed table. But in truth, I was building something in secret, a version of me they couldn't ignore forever. Still, I watched from afar as my brother took the company I loved and slowly turned it into something hollow. Reckless hires, shady loans, expansion with no roots, and Dad kept smiling. Years passed. I made money in places they couldn't spell, built a small firm with grit and vision. No family money, no favors, just me, coffee, and spreadsheets under dim apartment lights. Meanwhile, my brother was making headlines, but for the wrong reasons. The legacy he was handed was now bleeding red ink, drowning in lawsuits and whispers. And yet, no one called me. Not even once. Until one morning, the news broke. Chapman Industries declares bankruptcy. Assets up for auction. I stared at the screen for a long time, not blinking. It was like watching a house burn down that you were never allowed to enter. Then, without emotion, I opened a new tab and prepared a bid. This time, I wouldn't ask for permission. The auction was cold. Sterile lighting, coffee-stained paperwork, and desperate eyes that once looked at me with pity. I wore a navy blazer and silence, no jewelry, no emotion. I didn't need to announce myself. They knew exactly who I was. Even the auctioneer paused when he saw my name on the bidder list. But I kept my gaze forward, steady as a blade. My brother wasn't there. I heard he had fled to Costa Rica with the last of the liquid cash. Dad? He'd had a mild stroke the week before. Karma has sharp timing. Only my uncle showed up, pale and bitter, whispering curses under his breath. He didn't dare speak to me. He knew I wasn't here for revenge. I was here for justice. One by one, the assets were laid bare. Equipment, trademarks, properties, everything. That once felt like home, now tagged and numbered. When the headquarters building was announced, I raised my hand without hesitation. No one countered. Not one soul. Because in that room, for the first time, I wasn't invisible. I was the storm they never saw coming. I bought the entire company for less than the value of their old marketing budget. That's what pride costs, when mismanaged. That's what silence earns when it listens, learns, and waits. Walking through the empty offices days later, I felt nothing. No anger, no joy, just closure. The framed photo of my brother shaking hands still hung on the wall, crooked. I took it down, placed it gently in a box, and labeled it History. Because now, the legacy had a new owner, and she didn't need anyone's approval. Not anymore. I rebuilt the business with precision, discipline, and a touch of ruthless grace. The staff I hired were different, hungry, loyal, quietly brilliant. Every new client felt like a stitch on a wound that had festered too long. And every time I signed a deal, I imagined that old oak table cracking. But success doesn't erase old scars. One evening, months after the acquisition, I received a letter. It was handwritten, shaky, and signed by my father. He asked to meet, said he had things to explain. For a moment, I considered throwing it away. But curiosity is a cruel master, especially when it wears your father's handwriting. We met at a hospice. His eyes were tired, his body smaller than I remembered. He looked at me like I was a stranger, but spoke as if he owed me something. He said he gave the company to my brother out of fear that I'd outgrow them, that I was too ambitious to be tied down to one building, one family legacy. But all I ever wanted was to be seen. He apologized. But it wasn't the kind of apology that heals. It was more like a confession. A man unburdening himself before the end. He said he never expected me to succeed without their help. That watching me rise made him proud and ashamed at once. I nodded, but my silence was louder than any forgiveness. When I left, I didn't cry. I walked past old nurses, flickering lights, and the smell of antiseptic, untouched. What do you do when the thing you waited your whole life to hear comes? Too late? You archive it. Fold it into the chapters you've already closed. Because some people only see your worth when they have nothing left to protect, and by then, the moment is already gone. At home, I opened an old box. Inside was my original internship badge from when I was 16, back when I used to make coffee for meetings I could have led. I stared at the photo. Young me, hopeful, unaware. She didn't know what was coming, but she never stopped showing up. Weeks passed, and the company began to bloom again. Clients returned, not because of nostalgia, but because they trusted me. They saw something in the way I handled risk, measured, relentless, honest. The same people who once ignored my emails now asked for meetings. Every Miss Chapman they spoke carried a different weight now. The girl they had overlooked had become the woman they couldn't afford to dismiss. And yet, a shadow lingered. Not everything broken could be rebuilt. Employees who had once thrived under my brother's charm struggled with structure. Some resented me quietly, mourning a version of the company that never truly worked. But I didn't bend. I had waited too long to compromise now. Respect earned. Through resilience does not apologize for being firm. Then came the phone call. An old friend from college, now a business journalist, wanted to do a feature on the comeback queen. I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because the irony tasted like old wine. She wanted to know everything, from the betrayal to the auction to my father's letter. I told her parts, the ones I could say without flinching. The rest I kept, buried, exactly where they belonged. The article went viral. Thousands of comments, shares, and emails poured in. Some praised me, others asked for advice. A few apologized on behalf of all the daughters never chosen. It hit a nerve I didn't expect. Women across the world who'd been sidelined, silenced, dismissed. They saw themselves in my story. And for the first time, I didn't feel alone. Late one night, I sat at my desk, scrolling through messages. One caught my eye. It simply said, "Thank you for not giving up. Now I won't either." I leaned back, stared at the ceiling, and exhaled something I'd held in for years. This wasn't just about a business anymore. It was about legacy. One built, not inherited. And this time, it had my name carved into the wood. The building felt different now, not just because of the renovations or the new logo on the glass, doors, but because the energy had shifted. Firm handshakes replaced fake smiles. People walked like they belonged, like they mattered. I made sure of that. No one would feel invisible here, not on my watch. Still, ghosts lingered. Some days, I'd hear a phrase my father used to say echo in my mind. Business isn't sentimental. But I disagreed. Business is deeply personal when it's the thing they said you couldn't do. So yes, I ran spreadsheets, hired sharp minds, cut dead wood. But I also remembered birthdays, handwritten notes, and names of their kids. One afternoon, I found a letter slid under my office door. It was from a former manager, one who'd sided with my brother during the fallout. He wrote that he'd judged me unfairly, thinking I was too emotional to lead. But now, seeing the growth, the loyalty, the culture, I'd proven him wrong. He didn't ask for a job. He just wanted to say he was sorry. I placed the letter in a drawer labeled Fuel. Not everything was poetic, though. There were lawsuits to settle, debts to absorb, systems to rebuild from zero. I'd stay late, sometimes staring at old blueprints, wondering why I still felt so hungry. It wasn't about money. That came. It was about rewriting a story they tried to end without me, and making sure no one would ever skip my name again. And then came the day. 3 years after I bought it, Chapman Industries hit a milestone. Record profits. For the first time in its history, it was led by a woman and thriving. I walked through the main floor, watching the team celebrate with cake and music. Someone asked if I wanted to give a speech. I said no. I just smiled. They already knew. But fate has a sense of humor. A few months later, my brother returned, tanned, broke, and quieter than I remembered. He showed up in the lobby with a sheepish smile and a folder in his hand. Security asked if they should escort him out. I told them to let him in. We sat across from each other for the first time in over 5 years. He looked older, worn, like a man who had run out of masks to wear. He started with a joke, then silence, then finally, "You did what I couldn't." I didn't reply. Because what do you say to the boy who got everything and broke it, and to the woman who rebuilt it from ashes? He asked if there was any role for him. Not management, just anything, even basic. Said he missed the halls, the name, the purpose, and for a moment, I saw the brother I once played tag with in the warehouse. But the businesswoman in me spoke louder. "I don't hire out of guilt," I said calmly. "And I don't recycle mistakes." He nodded. No anger, just acceptance. He stood, thanked me for the meeting, and walked out slower than he came in. I watched him go, not with bitterness, but with closure. Sometimes the greatest victory is knowing you could have crushed someone, but chose dignity instead. That night, I wrote a new mission statement for the company. It began with a simple line: "We value those who build, not those who inherit." It was bold, unapologetic, and true. I had become everything they said I couldn't be, and somehow, even more than I dreamed. Some nights I still walked the empty floors after hours. There was something comforting in the quiet hum of machines, the glow of emergency lights. It reminded me of those early years. No team, no titles, just me and the idea that I could make this work. I'd press my palm against the glass and watch the city lights, wondering if they saw me now. Not the daughter in the corner, not the shadow behind the throne, but the architect of her own empire. I got invited to speak at conferences. Women in business, legacy rewritten, leadership in the face of rejection. Every time I stepped on stage, I saw faces lighting up, not from awe, but recognition. Young women who'd been passed over, sons of mothers who never got a chance. I'd tell my story, not to brag, but to carve a path wide enough for others. Because no one ever opened that door for me, I had to break it down. Back home, my father's condition worsened. Hospice sent updates. I didn't visit often. It wasn't resentment, it was reality. We had already said what needed to be said. But one morning, they called and said, "It's time." And I went, not as a daughter, but as a witness. He lay quiet, eyes fluttering under thin lids. Beside him sat a framed photo. My brother, him, and me, age 10, arms around each other. I didn't cry. I held his hand and whispered, "I made it, Dad." His lips moved faintly, maybe a smile, maybe a goodbye, then silence, final, peaceful, and still. After the funeral, I didn't stay long. I watched the casket lower from a distance, said no speech, threw no rose. He had shaped me through absence more than presence. And that's the thing about pain. It doesn't always leave scars on the surface. Sometimes it forges diamonds underneath. And I had become unbreakable. Weeks later, the boardroom changed. We opened a mentorship program named after my mother, the only one who had ever asked me what I wanted. She wasn't loud, but she was watching when no one else was. Now, young interns, girls with fire in their eyes and calluses on their dreams, filled the halls. They didn't ask for permission. They asked for responsibility. I hosted a dinner for the new hires. One of them pulled me aside and said, "Your story saved me from quitting." She thought she wasn't enough because no one picked her. I told her, "Being overlooked isn't a weakness, it's training. You learn to grow in the dark, so that when the light hits, you don't just shine, you blind." The press kept calling me the comeback queen. But there was no comeback. I was never given a place to return to. What I did was arrive, on my own terms, in my own time. No one gifted me power. I claimed it, with silence, with sweat, with years they never saw. Because that's how women, like me, win. My brother called once more, said he'd opened a small workshop. Wood, tools, slow work. He was different now. We spoke like strangers with a shared past, and that was enough. I didn't need revenge. I had results, and some wounds only fade when they no longer define you. On the company's 10th anniversary under my leadership, we held a celebration. They wanted to name a conference room after me. I declined. Instead, I chose a plaque that read, "Here, we earn our names," because that's the only legacy I trust. I started journaling again. Not the kind filled with to-do lists and growth metrics, but quiet pages filled with memories, questions, and moments I didn't want to forget. The first time I signed a payroll check with my name. The first smile from an employee who felt safe enough to speak up. The first time I looked in the mirror and didn't second-guess what I saw. I wrote about the table. The oak one where it all began. The one where I wasn't given a seat. I imagined burning it down, carving a new one, choosing who sat with me. Because legacies aren't about inheritance. They're about construction. What you build, how you build it, and who you build it for. And I was no longer asking to be included. I was designing the blueprint. One afternoon, I walked past a father and daughter in the cafe below our offices. She was explaining something, animated, brilliant. He listened, nodded, laughed with pride, and something inside me ached. Not with jealousy, but with healing. There are girls out there who won't have to fight for their father's respect. And I was helping build a world where that could be more common. My mother visited the office. She ran her hand along the walls, smiled at the energy, the laughter echoing from glass rooms. "You made it warm," she whispered. She always knew I would rise. She just never rushed me. I gave her a key to my office, not symbolic, practical, because I never wanted her to knock again. And in a quiet moment alone, I stood in front of the building. The new sign, the renovated entrance, the reflection of a woman who survived being forgotten. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt aligned, like the weight had finally settled in the right place. I had nothing left to prove, only stories left to tell. Years later, a young journalist asked me, If you could go back to that day, the day your brother got the company, what would you say to yourself? I paused, looked at her, and smiled. I'd say, let them underestimate you. Let them hand the crown to someone else. Because the fire you're about to walk through will forge something stronger than royalty. And one day, they'll call you queen. But it won't matter anymore. You'll already have built the kingdom. Legacy isn't passed down. It's built brick by painful brick, sometimes with bare hands, and sometimes it's built quietly in the shadows, with no applause. But when it stands, it shakes the earth. Because the loudest victories come from those who were never expected to win. And I was the earthquake they never saw coming. I walk slower now, not from age, but from presence. Every hallway I built feels sacred. Every soul I mentor feels familiar. Not because they remind me of who I was, but because I know what it's like to start unseen and rise uninvited, and I see the same quiet hunger in them. My brother's workshop thrives in its own way. He sends me hand-carved gifts, frames, pens, wooden clocks. We don't speak often, but when we do, it's without masks. He knows I'm not bitter, just rewritten. And in his own way, I think he respects me now. Not as a sister, but as a force. The oak table? I had it salvaged, reshaped, and placed in our new meeting room. Every woman who sits at it knows the story, knows the silence that once surrounded it, and knows that this table was earned, not given.